It was impossible to resist when I saw all that potential. An overwhelming desire invaded me. Hi, my lovelies. My name is Olivia, and I never thought I'd have the courage to tell this story. I'm 26 years old, blonde, short, with a style that has always been a mixture of innocence and daring. My life, like many people's, has had its ups and downs. Today, I want to share something that has left a deep impression on me, something that started out so ordinary, but ended up changing the way I see the world and myself. My family has always been large and full of stories, and one of the figures I admired most was my uncle, my mother's brother. For years, he lived in New York with my aunt, far away from the hustle and bustle of our daily lives. He was always that relative who appeared only on special occasions, with a natural charm and a manner that aroused respect and admiration in everyone. As a child, I saw in him a kind of silent hero, someone who carried the weight of experiences I could only imagine. Everything changed when he and my aunt returned to Brazil and decided to organize a family trip to a paradise beach. It was the kind of invitation that was impossible to refuse. The reunion was warm, full of hugs and laughter, but something different happened on that trip. The morning after we arrived, I went to the beach early to enjoy the sun. When he arrived, I saw that his gaze lingered longer than usual as he looked at me. It wasn't the casual look of an uncle seeing his niece after years, but something more attentive, almost curious. It was only an instant, but long enough to move me in a way I couldn't explain. I spent the rest of the day trying to ignore the discomfort it caused me, but the truth was that I couldn't. Something in that look seemed to say more than any words could. Something in that look seemed to say more than any words could. I wondered, was it just me? This trip began like any other, but at that moment, I realized that I was about to experience something unexpected, something that, as much as I tried to avoid it, had already begun to change everything. That morning, the beach was full of laughter and relaxed conversation. The whole family seemed relaxed, immersed in the typical comfort of a holiday. Sitting under the parasol, I watched the movement around me as I tried to get involved in the lively stories everyone was telling. But somehow my attention always ended up returning to him. My uncle was there, taking part in the conversations, but there was something about the way he carried himself that seemed different. His gaze wandered with a calmness that contrasted with the agitated atmosphere around us, but when it fixed on me, it seemed to carry a weight that I didn't know how to interpret. It wasn't the same look as years ago, when I was just a girl in the family. It was more attentive, almost inquisitive, as if he was trying to decipher something. I tried not to take any notice, ignoring the questions that popped into my head, but it was as if the atmosphere around us conspired to accentuate the intensity of those moments. Every time he looked away from me, I felt as if something silent was being said between us, even without us exchanging a word. Later, already on the sand, I adjusted my yoke to bask in the sun. The heat was comforting, but as I stretched out the fabric,
Like and subscribe now so you don't miss out on new stories.
I felt that look again. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I raised my eyes and met his. He didn't turn away immediately, like someone who knows he's been caught looking. He just stared at me, with a slight smile on his lips, the kind of smile that could be casual, but which, in that context, seemed to be loaded with hidden meanings. My reaction was instinctive. I smiled back, trying to look indifferent, but I felt my face heat up. It was as if a new kind of silent dialogue was being built up between us, something I didn't know how to name. Inside, my curiosity was growing. What was going on? Why did the way he looked at me seem so different, almost intimate? I tried to push these thoughts away as I watched the waves breaking on the sand. It was just an impression, I told myself, a trick of the mind. But the more I tried to rationalize, the harder it was to ignore the truth. Something was beginning, something I still didn't know if I wanted to understand. Later, as the sun began to set and the beach became quieter, I went for a walk along the shore. The sound of the waves was relaxing, but not enough to silence the thoughts echoing in my mind. I was lost in my daydreams when I heard his voice calling my name. He came towards me, bare feet and a calm expression on his face. "Would you like some company?" he asked, in a casual way that carried a tone of closeness that I couldn't ignore. As we walked side by side, we started talking. He talked about his life in New York, the challenges of building a career away from his family, and the memories of when we were all closer together. His words had a melancholy tone, like someone who has lived through a lot and carries stories that he has never fully told. I listened carefully, fascinated by the way he spoke, but at the same time uneasy. There was something in his eyes, in the way he looked at me during the pauses between sentences. It wasn't just a look lost in the past. It was as if he was seeing me in a different way, with a curiosity that made me uncomfortable and, at the same time, intrigued. The next day, during family lunch, the mood was light. Laughter echoed around the table, while side conversations filled the room with life. We were all relaxed when he suddenly looked at me and said, "You've grown up to be even more charming, Olivia." The sentence was spoken naturally, but the smile that accompanied it completely disarmed me. I felt my face heat up, but, not wanting to show the impact those words had, I replied with a casual, "Thank you," accompanied by a shy smile. Inside, however, my heart was racing. I tried to focus on the plate in front of me, but his words echoed in my mind like a song I couldn't stop listening to. He wasn't just commenting on my appearance. There was something more to the way he said it, something that seemed to go beyond the limits of an uncle's simple compliment to his niece. From that moment on, it was clear that our relationship was changing, even if neither of us wanted to admit it. The night of the barbecue had that energy typical of family gatherings. Loud laughter, the smell of roasting meat, and side conversations filled the backyard. I was sitting by the barbecue, listening absent-mindedly to the stories the uncles were telling, but from time to time I felt the weight of his gaze on me. He was always nearby, but he didn't approach in an obvious way, as if he were testing his own limits. It was subtle, but impossible to ignore. While everyone else was busy with their drinks and dishes, he seemed oblivious to what was going on around him, focused on something he didn't say in words. I pretended not to notice, but inside, every glance he threw in my direction seemed to ignite a spark that I couldn't control. Later, I went into the kitchen to organize the plates and glasses that had accumulated during the night. It was a moment of respite for me, away from the hubbub outside. But I wasn't alone for long. He came in, wearing a carefree smile and asking if I needed any help. "You don't have to. I'm already finishing," I replied quickly. But he ignored my refusal and started picking up the glasses from the worktop. The kitchen, which was large and airy, suddenly seemed too small. When our hands touched as we picked up the same glass, I felt a wave of energy run through my body like a shock. It was quick, but enough to unsettle me. He looked at me, his expression neutral, but his eyes said something else. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his tone calm, but with a background of concern that seemed deeper than the situation called for. I forced a smile and said something brief, trying to appear indifferent. But inside, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. He didn't say anything else, just continued to help me in silence. But the atmosphere around us seemed to carry an invisible weight, as if we both knew that that little moment had meant more than we were willing to admit. After he left, I stood there for a few moments, holding an empty plate and trying to process what had just happened. It was just a touch, just a question, but at the same time, it was everything. That night, as I went to bed, the house was plunged into silence, but my mind was a whirlwind. I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand why that touch in the kitchen had moved me so much. It was quick, almost insignificant, but the warmth I felt when our hands met seemed to have soaked into my skin. Every detail came back to me like a scene I couldn't stop watching. The way he asked if I was all right, his voice low and calm, the look in his eyes that seemed to go beyond the simple act of helping me. It was as if he was saying something without words, and the most confusing thing was that part of me wanted to understand what exactly he meant. Was I imagining things? Maybe it was the loneliness, the fact that I was so used to my routine that any change seemed extraordinary. But at the same time, I couldn't deny it. There was something there, something that neither he nor I seemed willing to name. The following evening, I went downstairs to get a glass of water. The lights were low, and the house seemed asleep. Then I heard the sound of snooker balls being hit softly. I followed the sound to the games room and found him there, playing by himself. He seemed completely at ease, but when he noticed me, he smiled. "Do you want to play?" he asked, bat in hand. I hesitated for a moment, but eventually accepted. He handed me a bat and began to teach me. It was simple, but every movement seemed calculated. When he adjusted my hand on the club for the first time, I felt my heart race. His closeness was almost suffocating. But at the same time, I didn't want to move away. "You're a fast learner," he said, with a smile that mixed lightness and something else. Something that made the atmosphere more charged than it should have been. I laughed nervously, trying to appear indifferent, but I knew that he noticed the effect his presence had on me. Every instruction, every light touch on my shoulder or hand, seemed to be loaded with intentions that neither of us dared to express. When the match was over, I quickly left, thanked him for the lesson, and went back to my room. My heart was still beating fast and my face was hot. The line between simple and complex seemed to be disappearing, and I knew I couldn't go on ignoring what was happening. As we played snooker that evening, the atmosphere seemed to take on a new density. The soft light illuminated the table, highlighting the bright colors of the balls and the polished wood of the cue in our hands. Ethan was relaxed, but his tone of voice, his words, carried something deeper. "Did you know that you've always been special to me, Olivia?" he said suddenly, as he prepared for a move. I remained motionless, feeling the weight of that sentence hanging between us. My heart raced, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. He spoke casually, but his eyes watched me with an intensity that revealed the meaning behind those words. "Thank you," I mumbled, trying to hide my confusion. My smile was shy, almost automatic, but I couldn't disguise the impact that statement had on me. It wasn't just a compliment or a random phrase. It was more than that, and we both knew it. The match continued, but the atmosphere had changed. His every move, his every word, seemed to be charged with an intention that dared not be fully revealed. The next day, during family dinner, the tension between us continued to grow, silent but undeniable. The table was full. Everyone was laughing and chatting, but we seemed to be isolated in our own bubble. Our gazes crossed more often than usual. Each time this happened, it was as if an entire conversation was taking place without a word being spoken. There were questions in his eyes, and I felt like I was answering them with my own, even though I didn't fully understand what he wanted to know. Our surroundings seemed to obscure the truth that only the two of us could perceive. Each exchange of glances carried a weight, a doubt, and above all, a desire that neither of us seemed prepared to acknowledge openly. When dinner was over and everyone began to disperse, I still felt the impact of everything that had happened. It wasn't just about the words said or the looks exchanged. It was about what was to come, something that seemed inevitable and at the same time, frightening. Lying in bed later, I realized that I could no longer deny it. Our relationship was changing, and the line between the familiar and the unknown was becoming increasingly blurred. That night, while the silence of the house enveloped everything, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as if it could provide me with answers. The events of the last few days ran through my mind. Every look, every word, every touch. It was clear that we were crossing a line that I had never imagined crossing, and that left me torn. Part of me wanted to keep going, let things take their course, and find out where this connection would take us. It was as if there was an invisible force pulling on us, something that seemed uncontrollable. But at the same time, a rational part of me was screaming, asking me to put the brakes on before things got out of hand. This duality consumed me. It wasn't just about him. It was about me, about the parts of me that he awakened, parts that I didn't know existed or had perhaps buried over the years. When dawn broke, I got out of bed with the weight of the previous night's thoughts still hanging over me. The house was quiet, with the distant sound of the ocean waves echoing through the window. We met in the kitchen, and our eyes met again, but this time there was something different. The atmosphere between us had changed. Every word we exchanged, every gesture we made, seemed to carry a hidden meaning, something that only the two of us understood. Despite this, we made a concerted effort to keep up appearances. We laughed with each other, took part in family conversations, and went about our routine as if everything was absolutely normal. But inside, the turmoil continued. It was as if we were dancing on a tightrope, balancing between what we felt and what we knew was right. Every step was calculated, but the danger of falling was always there. Over the course of the day, I realized that he was also dealing with the same doubts. His furtive glances and restrained smiles revealed an internal conflict that mirrored my own. As the sun set, the day ended with a sense of uncertainty. We didn't know what the future held, but we both knew that something had changed forever. At the end of the afternoon, when the sun was beginning to descend, creating long shadows around the house, I plucked up courage and called him to talk. I didn't know exactly what I would say, but something had to be said. We couldn't keep dancing around this nameless tension. He was sitting on the balcony, looking at the horizon when I approached. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice coming out more hesitantly than I would have liked. He nodded, indicating the chair next to him. I sat down, taking a deep breath before I began. I think we need to talk about what's going on between us." For a moment, he was silent, as if he were choosing his words carefully. Then he turned to me, his eyes serious, but not cold. "I feel it, Olivia," he said, his voice low and full of sincerity. "I feel that there's something different between us, something I never planned, but that I can't ignore." His words made my heart soar. That's how I felt too, but hearing him say it out loud made it all more real, more tangible. "I feel it too," I confessed, my voice almost a whisper. "But it's complicated. We're family, and I don't want something so messy to hurt who we are or the people we love." He agreed with a slow nod, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know, and that's why we need to keep it where it is. Maintain respect and maybe keep what we feel as our own, without crossing any boundaries." Those words were a relief, and at the same time, a farewell to what would never be. It was a mutual promise to preserve what we had, but also to put an end to something that hadn't even begun.
Click like now and subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this.
Later, when it was time to say goodbye, I felt an unexpected emptiness. He hugged me tightly, his hands holding my shoulders for a moment before releasing me. "Thanks for everything, Olivia," he said, with a sad smile. "Those days were special, and I'll never forget them." "No matter what, I don't either," I replied, my voice cracking as I tried to keep my composure. That hug carried so much that we didn't need to say anything else. We knew what it meant, and at the same time, what it could never be. When he left, I stared at the empty space where the car had been parked. The house seemed quieter than ever, but inside me there was a mixture of peace and longing. What we experienced was brief, but it changed something in me forever. After he left, the house became incredibly silent. Every corner seemed empty, as if his presence had filled spaces I hadn't known existed. I spent days reflecting on what had happened between us, every moment, every exchange of glances, every meaningful word. It was strange to think that something so brief and, at the same time, so profound could transform me in a way I would never have imagined. He brought out parts of me that I had forgotten. His gestures, his words, even the tension we shared, made me realize that sometimes life surprises us with emotions we can't predict or control. But more than that, he made me look inwards, at who I am and who I want to be. Perhaps the most important thing was not what could have been, but what I learned about myself. I learned that I am capable of feeling with an intensity that I thought I had lost, that life is made up of moments that challenge us, and that we don't always need to cross boundaries for those moments to have meaning. Even so, the line between the right and the unknown has never seemed so fragile. At times I found myself thinking, what if we had chosen another path? What would it have been like? But then I remembered that not everything has to be lived to be important. Some experiences are there to teach us, not to be realized. Now, looking to the future, I feel a mixture of gratitude and longing. Gratitude for having experienced something that made me grow, and longing for what was and what will never be. I've learned to value what I have and accept things as they are, but that doesn't mean the memories don't stay with me. They are there, as a subtle reminder that life is made up of layers, and not all of them need to be unraveled. And now I ask you, what would you do if you were me? Is it possible to deal with such strong emotional tension without overstepping your boundaries? Do you think decisions like this can transform us, even if they don't become something concrete? Leave your opinions in the comments. Like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that make us think and feel.
Don't let this opportunity pass you by. On the left, I've separated an exclusive video for you. On the right, I've left a playlist with videos you like. Click on the screen now and choose.